Hi everyone, this is Elaine. Welcome to Flat Earth for Dummies 101. Definition of dummy, indoctrinated in globe from birth. A spinning globe is only true in fairy tales. Only the truth will set you free. The lies were out to get me, to feast upon my brain. Freemasonic wormholes were to blame. Then I saw the way. Now I'm a flat earther. There is no curve, no globe in my mind. The earth is flat. We're the believers, don't eat the deceivers, those who lie.
Yggdrasil
In Norwegian, Yggdrasil
is an immense mythical tree that plays a central role in Norse cosmology, where it connects the 9 worlds. Our 7 continents fit in imperfectly with Tesla's energetic vortex laws of 3, 6, and 9. But what if we are missing 2 continents, making 9 total? The first, Lemuria, in the Pacific Ocean, once between Australia and the Americas, the crown chakra of the Earth. And second, the heart chakra, Atlantis, in the Atlantic Ocean. As the macrocosm, so the microcosm. Bob points out that there is a mycelium mushroom mat that covers the entire United States just under the ground. One giant mushroom, hundreds of miles large, just inches under the ground that most people have no idea exists. Guilty as charged. Andrew L. says, what if the flood surrounding the earth, actually made of salted and other mineralized water, caused a drowning and slow petrification with high pressure over a short amount of time, 100 days or so, I'd call that a fast petrification, and created this result of tree stumps above and oil below as the roots were broken down. The trees were possibly cut before that, but then later along came this flood. Some of them left still standing and broken by swift water waves could have created some of the mountains that we have today. Mudflood Giants, who gets an A+ for his channel name alone, blew us away with this little gem of a video on bushcraft extraction of crude oil out of dead tree roots using fire or heat, as we discussed in alternative volcanism theory in part 4.
I talked to a guy when I was up in Alaska. He said, he told me he works in the oil field drilling for oil near Barrow. He said they drill down 1,000 feet through permanently frozen ground, permafrost, and hit trees. He said one day they were drilling and hit a tree, and they always take whatever they drill out and lay it on the ground beside them to go, develop a sample of what's down in the ground. He said they drilled straight through the top of a tree that was 300 feet tall, standing up. This is on the north slope of Alaska. Folks, I was just up there. There are no trees. We saw one tree growing in a Chinese restaurant inside, about this big. That's it. There are no trees in Barrow, Alaska. There are certainly no trees 300 feet tall. There are very few trees in the world 300 feet tall. Some of the redwoods are that size, but how do you get 300-foot tree standing up under 1,000 feet of permanently frozen ground? What happened? When they drill down through the ice, sometimes they find strange things. Like in Antarctica, they drilled down, which is at the bottom of the world here. Well, we call it the bottom. Of course, you can't tell when you're standing there, but at the south end of the world, they drilled down through the ice and hit coal. There's enormous evidence of huge forests in Antarctica. where there's not one tree growing today. There's not a blade of grass growing down there. Admiral Byrd said he found frozen palm leaves under the ice near the South Pole, and thousands of well-preserved leaves found in Antarctica. What happened? 250 miles from the South Pole, they find frozen leaves in the side of a cliff. There are no trees there, none, zero. This article talks about the discovery of these leaves. They have their original cellular content. These leaves are not fossilized. They're still leaves. Up in northern Canada, there's a place called Ellis Island. There on Ellesmere Island, there are no trees at all, none, yet they find petrified redwood stumps up there. There are certainly no redwood trees growing up there in northern Canada, okay? There are only a few select locations where they grow along the California coast and up into Oregon a little bit. I debated Jeannie Scott. She's the president of the National Center for Science Education in Berkeley, California. She's right again. There is so much coal in the world that if you took every tree and blade of grass and bush and squished it, you couldn't make all the coal. There are enormous volumes of coal in the earth. I said, Jeannie, you are right. She said, well, don't you see, Hovind, there had to be an enormous amount of time to lay down all the coal seams. Oh, no, no, no. Right there, she's wrong. You see, she's looking at today's world and assuming that's how it's always been. The coal we find in the ground today is a result of that flood which buried the world before the flood, when they had lots more trees. There's a coal mine in Montana that is 10,000 square miles of coal up to 200 feet thick. Someone told me a few months ago they've now found a seam 300 feet thick. That's a lot of coal. A lot of coal. And sometimes in coal, human artifacts are found. This bell was found inside a lump of coal. This iron pot was found inside a lump of coal. The sole of a shoe found inside a lump of coal. We cover more on that on video 6. But the Bible says there were herbs, that's plants, over all the earth. It's not that way today. 70% of the earth is underwater, for heaven's sake. Okay, that's not covered with plants. The earth was covered with plants when God made it. 70% of the earth today is underwater. Did you know only 3% of this earth is habitable for mankind? A lot of it's under desert, ice caps, tundra, mountain ranges nobody can live on. 3% is habitable. Probably the pre-flood world was, I would just be picking a number and say probably 80% land and only 20% water. The oceans weren't there. The water was in the crust of the earth or in the canopy overhead. But there were trees from pole to pole before the flood came.
Dr. Brown?
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features which can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, the rapid continental drift, why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent covered with lush vegetation. There were seas and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, but perhaps 9,000 feet high. According to the hydroplate theory, the pre-flood Earth had a lot of subterranean water, about half of what is now in our oceans. This water was contained in interconnected chambers, forming a thin spherical shell, about half a mile thick, perhaps 10 miles below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water stretched the crust, just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack which grew in both directions at about 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. All along this globe-encircling rupture, fountains of water jetted supersonically almost 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains, such as the earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day. And it describes these events about 5,000 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains eroded the rock on both sides of the crack, producing huge volumes of sediments that settled out of this muddy water all over the earth. These sediments trapped and buried plants and animals, forming the fossil record. This erosion widened the rupture. Eventually, the width was so great that the compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, and buckled. The portions of the hydroplate that buckled down formed ocean trenches. Those that buckled upward formed mountains. This is why the major mountain chains are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. On the continents, each bowl-shaped depression or basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes.
The demonstrations you have just witnessed of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity supports the biblical story of the deluge in every detail.
So they project the image around the ball, and that's how they came up with the globe.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
That's why it's so hard to convince you you've been fooled.
I thought the globe was more or less a given thing. The more I saw, the more was fake. Was the moon a junkyard, the ISS a sham? When I wanted answers, I got spam. Then I saw the way. Now I'm a flat earther. There is no curve, no globe in my mind. The earth is flat. We're the believers, don't hate the deceivers, those who lie.